For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had watched Earth from the darkness of space. Their monitoring stations floated silently beyond the orbit of Neptune, recording everything that happened on the small blue planet. They watched humanity's wars. They watched their plagues. They watched every stumbling step the humans took toward building their civilization. And after all that time, the Council had reached a simple conclusion. Humans were primitive, violent, and completely unremarkable. Ambassador Velthry of the Nixian Collective sat in her private chamber aboard the Council's great station. Reviewing the latest reports from Earth, her pale blue skin glowed softly in the dim light as she scrolled through the data. Her species had been studying alien races for longer than most civilizations had existed. They had cataloged over 40,000 sentient species across the galaxy, and humanity ranked somewhere near the bottom of that list. The humans still burned ancient plant matter to power their machines. They still fought wars over invisible lines they had drawn on maps. They had not even achieved unity on their own world, splitting themselves into hundreds of separate nations that argued and competed constantly. They had barely managed to reach their own moon. That had been decades ago. Velthry closed the report and let out a long breath. There was nothing new here. There never was. The next day, she stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council. Beings of every shape and size filled the vast chamber, some present in physical form, others appearing as shimmering holograms projected from distant worlds. The air hummed with translation devices working to convert her words into thousands of different languages. The humans remain a Level 2 civilization, Velthry announced, her voice calm and measured. They are barely capable of reaching their own moon. Their technology is primitive. Their society is fragmented. They pose no threat to anyone and offer no value to the Council. I recommend we continue passive observation for another 1,000 years. No one disagreed. No one even asked questions. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was beneath their concern, not worth the effort of contact or the risk of interference. The Council moved on to more important matters, and Earth was forgotten once again. But the galaxy is a vast and dangerous place. And not everyone shared the Council's disinterest in the small blue world, deep in the unexplored regions of space. Far from the watchful eyes of the Council, something ancient and terrible was stirring. The Krath Dominion had been conquering worlds for 10,000 years. Their empire stretched across an entire arm of the galaxy. Built on the broken remains of civilizations that had dared to resist them, in the last century alone, they had consumed 17 different species, stripping their planets of resources and enslaving or destroying their populations. The Krath were not members of the Council. They did not follow its rules or respect its boundaries. They took what they wanted, and they wanted everything. Their scouts had been exploring the edges of Council territory for years, searching for easy targets, and they had found one. A world rich in water and heavy metals, blessed with a breathable atmosphere and abundant life. A world protected by nothing more than primitive spacecraft and chemical rockets. A world called Earth. The Krath High Commander studied the scout reports with satisfaction. The native species was weak and divided. They had no shields, no energy weapons, no faster-than-light travel. Conquering them would be simple. The entire operation would take less than a week. He gave the order. The invasion fleet began its journey. On Earth, no one knew what was coming. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in September. The sun rose over Kansas City, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. People drove to work, dropped their children at school, and complained about the weather. It was an ordinary day. It's a kind of day that would be forgotten by everyone who lived through it. And then the sky split open. A ship the size of Manhattan descended through the clouds above Kansas City. It moved slowly, almost lazily, as if it had all the time in the world. Its shadow fell across 3 states, blocking out the sun and plunging millions of people into sudden darkness. The sound it made was like nothing anyone had ever heard, a deep rumbling that could be felt in the bones. Similar ships appeared over Beijing, Moscow, Sao Paulo, and Lagos, 12 vessels in total. Each one 15 kilometers long, each one carrying enough firepower to devastate a continent. Within minutes, Every news channel on the planet was showing the same impossible images. Within hours, the entire world knew that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. Lieutenant Commander Danny Hutchins was halfway through his morning coffee at Peterson's Space Force Base in Colorado. When every alarm in the building screamed to life, he dropped his cup and ran toward the command center, his heart pounding in his chest. He had trained for emergencies his entire career, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw on the screens. "How many?" he asked. Well, the answer was already burning itself into his memory. Sergeant Katie Marino looked up from her console, her face pale and her hands trembling. 12 primary vessels, sir, each one approximately 15 kilometers in length. They entered our atmosphere without any warning. Our satellites didn't detect them until they were already here. Are they responding to communications? No, sir. We've tried every frequency. Radio, microwave, laser, nothing. They're not talking to us. The Krath did not need to talk. They had never negotiated with a conquered species, and they were not about to start now. Their first transmission to Earth was not words, but action. A single beam of concentrated plasma that struck the Swiss Alps and vaporized an entire mountain in less than 3 seconds. The flash was visible from space. The shockwave killed everyone within 50 kilometers. The message was clear: surrender or burn. Back at the Council monitoring station, Ambassador Velthury received an emergency transmission that pulled her from her sleep. She read it once, then twice, then a third time, certain there had been some mistake. The Krath have invaded Earth, she whispered to herself in the darkness of her chamber. Those fools. They have attacked a Council-monitored world. She dressed quickly and called for an emergency session of the Council. Representatives from 37 species gathered within the hour, their holographic forms flickering with agitation and concern. The Krath had violated protocols, yes, but that was not the real concern. The real question was simple. What, if anything, should the Council do about it? "We should intervene," suggested the delegate from the Harmony of Worlds, a collective of peaceful species that had long advocated for protecting primitive civilizations. "The humans cannot possibly defend themselves. They will be slaughtered and risk war with the Krath," countered the Vorn representative, his scaled face twisted with contempt. "For a species that has not even mastered fusion power, let them fall. The Krath will strip the planet of resources and move on within a year. We lose nothing of value." The debate continued for hours, voices rising and falling as representatives argued their positions. Some wanted to help. Others wanted to stay far away. A few quietly suggested that humanity's destruction might actually benefit the Council by keeping the Krath occupied and satisfied. While they talked, the people of Earth were dying, and no one in that great chamber seemed to notice or care. But Ambassador Velthury was watching the feeds from the monitoring stations. She was watching closely, and what she saw in those first hours would change everything she thought she knew about the primitive, violent, unremarkable species called humanity. The first day of the invasion was chaos. Pure, absolute chaos. Cities burned. Millions fled their homes. Governments scrambled to respond to a threat they had never imagined possible. Military bases launched everything they had at the alien vessels, and everything they had bounced harmlessly off. Invisible shields that glowed bright blue with each impact. The Krath barely noticed. They had seen this before, on world after world. The primitives always fought at first. They always failed. And then they surrendered, broken and hopeless, ready to accept whatever fate their conquerors chose for them. But something different was happening on Earth. Something the Krath had never seen before. President Linda Vasquez had been in office for less than 2 years. She was a former senator from Texas, known for her calm demeanor and practical approach to problems. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment. She stood in a bunker deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, surrounded by generals and advisors, staring at screens that showed her world being torn apart. The aliens had sent a message, translated through some unknown technology into every language on Earth simultaneously. The message was simple: surrender within 48 hours, or face complete destruction. No negotiations. No conditions. Just submission or death. Her advisors were divided. Some wanted to fight. Others argued that resistance was pointless, that humanity should accept the inevitable and try to negotiate for the best terms possible. A few had already given up entirely, sitting in stunned silence with empty eyes. Linda Vasquez listened to them all, and then she made her decision. She addressed the United Nations via video link, her face broadcast to every screen on the planet. Her voice was steady, though inside she was terrified. "They have demanded our unconditional surrender within 48 hours," she said. "They have demonstrated weapons beyond our current understanding. They have shown us that they can destroy anything we build, anything we love, anything we are. They believe we are helpless." She paused, and something hard entered her eyes. "They are wrong." Within hours, something unprecedented began to happen. Old enemies set aside generations of hatred. Russian submarines surfaced alongside American aircraft carriers and began sharing tactical information. Chinese satellites were open to European military networks. Indian and Pakistani generals who had spent their entire careers preparing to fight each other sat down together and began planning a joint defense. It was not easy. There were arguments, suspicions, and decades of distrust to overcome. But the sight of alien vessels hovering over their cities focused minds in a way nothing else could. Whatever differences they had, whatever wars they had fought or might have fought, none of it mattered now. They were all human, and humanity was under attack. The scientists moved even faster than the military. Research facilities around the world stopped whatever they were working on and turned their attention to a single problem: how to hurt the invaders. Dr. Nathan Webb was a physicist at MIT. Brilliant but difficult, the kind of man who had made enemies at every institution he had ever worked for. When the invasion began, he was in the middle of a bitter dispute with a colleague over funding. That dispute ended the moment the first alien ship appeared. Within hours, he was on a video call with scientists from a dozen countries, including several he had spent years feuding with. "Their shields absorb kinetic and thermal energy," he explained, pulling up data captured by military sensors. "Every missile we fire, every bomb we drop, just makes the shields stronger. Conventional weapons are useless." "Then we need unconventional weapons," said Dr. Priya Sharma from the Indian Space Research Organization. She was younger than Nathan, with a reputation for creative thinking that bordered on reckless. "What about electromagnetic interference? Can we disrupt the shield generators?" "The frequencies are too high," said Dr. Marcus Klein from CERN. "Our equipment cannot generate that kind of output." "Then we build new equipment," Nathan replied. "We have 48 hours. Let's get to work." Danny Hutchins had not slept since the invasion began. He had been assigned to coordinate between military and scientific teams, which meant he spent his time running between bunkers, relaying information, and trying to keep everyone focused on the task at hand. It was exhausting work, but he did not complain. Complaining was a luxury he could not afford. He was in a conference room, listening to the scientists argue about shield frequencies, when an idea struck him. "Wait," he said, cutting into the debate. "You said the shields fluctuate in a predictable pattern. The strength goes up and down at regular intervals," as Dr. Sharma confirmed. "We have mapped the cycle. There is a brief window, approximately 200 milliseconds, where the shield strength drops by almost 40%. So if we time our attacks to hit during that window, we might actually penetrate. In theory, yes. But the timing would have to be precise to the microsecond. Our automated systems are not fast enough. By the time they detect the window and fire, it is already closed." Danny thought about this for a moment. What if we do not use automated systems? What if humans make the decisions in real time? We can process visual information and react faster than most machines. It is how fighter pilots have always worked. The room fell silent. It was a crazy idea. It would require pilots to fly directly at alien vessels, watching for shield fluctuations with their own eyes and firing at exactly the right moment. The margin for error would be measured in fractions of a second. One mistake would mean death. but it was their only chance. Within hours, the plan was being transmitted to military bases around the world. Pilots were briefed on what to look for. Scientists worked to create simple visual indicators that would help humans spot the fluctuation windows. Weapons were modified to fire faster, to give the pilots every possible advantage. Major Christine Park was one of the first to volunteer. She was a fighter pilot stationed in Japan, with 15 years of experience and a reputation for staying calm under pressure. When she heard the plan, she did not hesitate. "I can do this," she told her commanding officer. "Just get me close enough." Around the world, others were volunteering too. Pilots, soldiers, ordinary citizens who had no military training but refused to sit and wait for death. They came from every country, every background, every walk of life. They had nothing in common except one thing. They were human, and they were not going to give up. At the Galactic Council monitoring station, Ambassador Veltheri watched the feeds with growing amazement. She had expected the humans to surrender. Every species in Council records had surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. It was the logical choice, the only choice that made sense. But the humans were not surrendering. They were fighting. More than that, they were coming together, setting aside differences that had divided them for generations. She saw enemies working side by side, rivals sharing resources, nations that had been on the brink of war now standing united against a common threat. "This is not possible," she whispered to herself. "They should be panicking. They should be turning on each other. This is not how primitive species behave." But the evidence was undeniable. Something extraordinary was happening on Earth, and for the first time in her long career, Ambassador Veltheri found herself hoping that the primitives might somehow survive. The first counterattack came 18 hours after the invasion began. Major Christine Park led a squadron of 12 fighter jets toward a Krath patrol craft that was systematically destroying military installations along the coast of Japan. The alien vessel was smaller than the main ships, only about 300 meters long, but it had already killed thousands of people and shown no signs of slowing down. Christine's hands were steady on the controls. She had studied the data, memorized the shield patterns, practiced the timing in her head 100 times. She knew her chances of survival were slim. She flew anyway. "All pilots maintain formation," she said into her radio. "Watch for the blue shimmer. When you see it fade, that is your window. You will have less than a second. Make it count." The alien craft detected them and turned to engage. Energy weapons began charging, glowing bright red along the vessel's hull. Christine ignored them. She was watching the shields, looking for the pattern the scientists had described. There, a flicker. The blue glow dimmed for just a moment. "Fire," she commanded. 12 missiles launched simultaneously. 11 of them struck the shields and exploded harmlessly. But 3 of them fired at precisely the right moment, slipped through the weakened barrier, and struck the alien hull. The Krath craft shuddered. Smoke poured from a wound in its side. It did not fall, but it listed badly, struggling to maintain altitude. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had drawn blood. The news spread around the world within minutes. They could be hurt. The invaders were not invincible. It was a small victory, barely significant in military terms, but it changed everything. Hope, which had been dying, suddenly flared back to life at the Galactic Council station. Ambassador Veltheri stared at the footage in disbelief. She replayed it 3 times, certain she had misunderstood what she was seeing. "They damaged a Krath patrol craft," she said aloud. "The humans actually damaged a Krath vessel." "Impossible," said her aide, a young Nixian who had been assigned to assist with Earth's observation. "The Krath have the most advanced defensive technology in the quadrant. These primitives do not even have energy weapons. And yet," Veltheri replied, gesturing at the screen. "Look." She immediately requested a full council session. The representatives gathered, and for the first time the debate about Earth took on a different tone. The humans were fighting. The humans were adapting. The humans were doing things that no level to civilization should be capable of doing. On Earth, the fighting continued. The humans lost more battles than they won, and the cost in lives was staggering. Cities fell. Millions died. The Krath retaliated against every successful attack with devastating force, determined to crush any resistance before it could spread. But the humans would not stop. They could not stop. They had seen that the enemy could bleed, and that knowledge drove them forward. In a basement in Colorado, a young man named Sam Torres was doing something no one had thought possible. He was only 19 years old, a computer science student who had been planning to graduate next spring. Now he was leading a team of hackers trying to crack the alien communications network. The signals are encrypted, he explained to the military officers watching over his shoulder. But encryption follows patterns, and patterns can be broken. We just need enough data. For 3 days, Sam and his team worked without sleep, fueled by coffee and desperation. They could not understand the alien language, but they could track the signals. They began mapping the enemy's command structure, identifying which ships were giving orders and which were receiving them. "There," Sam said, pointing at his screen. "That one. That is their command vessel. Every other ship defers to it." The information was immediately shared with military commanders around the world. If they could disable or destroy the command vessel, the invasion might collapse. It was a long shot, but it was something. Meanwhile, in Australia, a retired submarine commander named Joe Patterson had a different idea. The alien sensors were sophisticated, capable of tracking aircraft and missiles from hundreds of kilometers away. But they seemed to have trouble detecting things underwater. They are not from a water world, Joe reasoned. They are not used to threats coming from below. Our submarines are invisible to them. He proposed a plan. Submarines would wait beneath the waves, hidden and silent, until an alien craft came within range. Then they would surface just long enough to fire and dive again before the enemy could respond. It was dangerous. It was risky. It was exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that humanity needed. The plan worked better than anyone expected. When a Krath vessel descended toward Sydney Harbor, intending to destroy the Australian naval base, 3 submarines rose from the depths and fired torpedoes modified with experimental warheads. The alien craft was not prepared for an attack from below. Its shields, optimized for aerial threats, could not adjust quickly enough. The vessel crashed into the sea with a sound like thunder. It was the first Krath craft to be completely destroyed by human weapons. The Krath commander, a veteran of 30 successful planetary conquests, received the news in stunned silence. He had expected this campaign to be over in hours. Instead, his forces were taking casualties from a species that should have been helpless. His superiors, in the Dominion, were already asking difficult questions. He ordered reinforcements and prepared for a longer fight than he had anticipated. Back at the council station, Ambassador Velthury convened yet another session. This time, she did not report statistics or analysis. She simply showed the footage. She showed doctors in bombed hospitals, operating by flashlight because the power had failed, but they refused to stop. She showed farmers driving tractors loaded with food and supplies to refugee camps, risking their lives to help strangers. She showed soldiers from nations that had been enemies for centuries fighting side by side, trusting each other with their lives. She showed a grandmother in Tokyo using her own body to shield a child from falling debris, a child she had never met and would never see again. "The humans have lost 60 million people in 72 hours, Velthury said quietly. 60 million? Their cities are burning. Their military forces are being destroyed. Every logical analysis says they cannot win." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives. "And yet they keep fighting. Not because they think they can win. They fight because surrender is simply not something they are willing to consider. They fight because they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. They fight because that is what humans do." The chamber was silent. Even the most cynical delegates had nothing to say. "We called them primitive," Velthury continued. "We called them violent and divided. We were right about the violence. We were right about the divisions. They have spent their entire history at war with each other. But we failed to understand something important." She took a breath. "How they know how to fight. They know how to lose and keep fighting. They've been practicing for 10,000 years. And the Krath, for all their advanced technology, have never faced anything like this." The debate that followed was heated, But the tone had changed. The humans were no longer being dismissed as irrelevant. Something was happening on Earth that demanded attention, that demanded respect. And for the first time, representatives began to suggest that perhaps the Council should do something to help. By the fourth day, the cost of resistance had become almost unbearable. 90 million people were dead. Half of the world's major cities had been reduced to smoking ruins. The global economy had collapsed entirely. Food supplies were running low. Clean water was becoming scarce. The infrastructure that modern civilization depended on was crumbling faster than anyone could repair it, and still, humanity fought. Danny Hutchins stood in what remained of Los Angeles. The city he had known was gone, replaced by a landscape of rubble and ash that stretched to the horizon. Fires still burned in some places, sending columns of black smoke into a sky already darkened by dust and debris. The smell was something he would never forget. A mixture of burning metal, chemicals, and things he did not want to think about. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, some of it his own. He had slept perhaps 6 hours in the past 4 days, and those hours had been filled with nightmares. Around him, a ragged group of survivors was loading supplies into a convoy of damaged vehicles. They were heading inland, away from the coast, away from the alien vessels that had turned the Pacific shoreline into a graveyard. A young woman approached him. She was maybe 18 years old, with dirty blonde hair and eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. She was carrying a rifle that she clearly had no idea how to use, holding it awkwardly like it might bite her. "Sir," she said, "what do we do now?" Danny looked at her, then at the burning city, then at the sky where alien craft still prowled like sharks waiting for prey. He thought about all the training he had received, all the plans and protocols that were supposed to prepare him for any situation. None of it applied here. Nothing in any manual covered this. "We survive tonight," he said finally, "and then we figure out how to survive tomorrow. That is all we have ever done. That is all any of us can do." The young woman nodded slowly. It was not a satisfying answer, but it was honest. And somehow, honesty felt more valuable now than comfort ever could. Across the world, similar scenes were playing out. In the ruins of Paris, a group of firefighters worked to rescue people trapped beneath collapsed buildings, ignoring the alien patrol craft circling overhead. In Mumbai, doctors performed surgery in a makeshift hospital set up in an underground parking garage, using car batteries for power and flashlights for illumination. In Snow Paulo, ordinary citizens formed bucket brigades to fight fires because there were no more fire trucks left. The Krath commander watched the situation reports with growing frustration. His losses were minimal, barely noticeable in strategic terms. But they were losses, and he was not accustomed to losing anything. More importantly, his timetable was falling apart. This conquest should have been completed in 2 days. Now, he was facing a 4th day with no end in sight. His superiors in the Dominion were sending increasingly pointed messages. Resources were being diverted from other operations to support his campaign. Questions were being asked about his competence. The political situation back home was becoming complicated. He made a decision. If the humans would not surrender, he would remove the option entirely. He ordered his fleet to prepare for full planetary bombardment. They would not conquer Earth. They would sterilize it. Every city, every military base, every center of population would be destroyed. The planet's resources could still be harvested later. Once the troublesome inhabitants had been eliminated, at the Council monitoring station, Ambassador Velthary received this information with a cold feeling in her stomach. The bombardment would begin within hours. When it was finished, nothing would survive on Earth's surface. 8 billion people would die, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Or was there? She requested an emergency meeting with the Council leadership. The request was denied. She requested it again, more forcefully this time. Still denied? The Council had made its position clear. Earth was not worth risking war with the Krath. Velthary returned to her quarters and sat alone in the darkness. She had served the Council for 2 centuries. She had followed its rules, respected its decisions, believed in its mission. But something had changed during these past 4 days. Something had shifted in the way she saw the universe. The humans were going to die. All of them. Every man, woman, and child on that small blue planet would be erased from existence. The galaxy would continue as if they had never existed at all. The Council would note the loss in its records, file it away, and forget about humanity forever. And that, Valtheri realized, was wrong. It was simply, fundamentally wrong. She thought about what she had seen over the past 4 days. The courage, the sacrifice, the unity that had emerged from chaos. She thought about the grandmother in Tokyo and the doctors in Mumbai and the pilots who flew into certain death because they refused to let their world fall without a fight. These people deserved better. They deserved a chance. Valtheri made a decision that would change her life forever. She opened a communications channel and began transmitting on a priority frequency that only the Krath High Command could receive. Her message was simple and direct. This is Ambassador Valtheri of the Galactic Council. I am claiming Earth under protectorate status according to Section 7 of the Galactic Accords. Any further aggression against this world will be considered an act of war against all Council members. Stand down immediately. It was a bluff. The biggest bluff in galactic history. The Council had authorized nothing. There was no protectorate claim. Valtheri was acting entirely on her own, committing what might be considered treason against her own government. The Krath commander received her transmission and hesitated. He did not fear one Nixian ambassador, but the Galactic Council represented hundreds of species, thousands of worlds, a combined military force that even the Dominion could not defeat. If her claim was legitimate, attacking Earth would mean war on a scale the galaxy had never seen. He demanded proof of the protectorate status. Valtheri had no proof to give. Her bluff was about to be called, and when it was, the bombardment would proceed and humanity would end. But something unexpected happened. Other voices began joining hers on the communication channel. The delegate from the Harmony of Worlds added their seal to her transmission, claiming to support the protectorate. Then the representative from the Stellar Communion did the same. Then a dozen more voices, then 24. It was not official. It was not authorized. It was individuals making choices, representatives acting on their own judgment rather than waiting for council approval. They had watched the humans fight and die for 4 days. They had seen something in that struggle that moved them, inspired them, shamed them, one by one. They added their voices to Valtheri's call. The Krath commander found himself facing not one rogue ambassador, but a growing coalition of council members. The situation had changed dramatically. What had been a simple conquest was now threatening to become a galactic incident. He calculated the risks. He weighed the benefits against the costs. He thought about his career, his reputation, his future in the Dominion. And finally, reluctantly, he gave an order that he had never given before in his entire military career. All vessels, stand down. Prepare to withdraw. On Earth, the humans noticed the alien ships beginning to move. At first, they thought it was another attack, another devastating strike that would kill millions more. They braced themselves for the end. But the ships were not attacking. They were leaving, rising through the atmosphere, gathering in formation, and then accelerating away from Earth at speeds no human technology could match. Within an hour, the skies were empty. The invasion was over. The silence was the strangest part. For 5 days, the skies had been filled with alien vessels, with explosions and fire and the constant threat of death from above. And then, suddenly, there was nothing. Just clouds and sun and the ordinary blue that humans had taken for granted their entire existence. People emerged from shelters and basements and the ruins of their homes. They looked up at the empty sky and did not know what to feel. Relief, grief, confusion, joy. All of these emotions mixed together into something that had no name. Something that could only be experienced in that moment. In that specific circumstance that no human being had ever faced before, they had survived. Against impossible odds. Against an enemy with technology centuries beyond their own. Against the cold mathematics of war that said they should have been crushed in hours. They had survived. The celebration, when it came, was muted by grief. 93 million people had died during the invasion. Every family on Earth had lost someone. Cities that had stood for centuries were gone. The infrastructure of civilization would take decades to rebuild. The psychological wounds would take even longer to heal. But humanity was still here. Battered, bloodied, forever changed, but still here, at the Galactic Council station. Ambassador Veltheri faced a very different kind of reckoning. She had been summoned before the full council to answer for her actions. The charges against her were serious, unauthorized intervention, diplomatic overreach, falsely claiming protectorate status, and violations of 17 different protocols and regulations. The chamber was filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Many of them were angry. Some were sympathetic. All of them were watching to see what would happen to the ambassador who had single-handedly changed the course of galactic politics. "How do you answer these charges?" asked the chief arbiter, an ancient being whose species had been mediating disputes since before most civilizations existed. Veltheri stood straight and met the arbiter's gaze, without flinching. She had known this moment would come. She had accepted the consequences of her actions before she had even begun. "I answer that the Council's assessment of humanity was catastrophically wrong," she said, her voice clear and steady. "For 3,000 years we watched them from the shadows. We saw their wars, their divisions, their failures. We concluded that they were primitive and violent and unworthy of our attention." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled delegates. "We were right about the violence. We were right about the divisions. But we failed to see what those qualities actually meant. The humans are not violent despite their civilization. They are civilized despite their violence. Every step forward they have taken has been against their own nature, against their own instincts. They fight themselves as hard as they fight anyone else." Veltheri gestured, and the chamber's display systems activated. Footage began playing. Footage she had selected carefully from the 5 days of invasion. When the Krath arrived, I expected the humans to panic. I expected them to turn on each other, to collapse into chaos, to make our assessment of them look generous. Instead, I watched something that I've never seen in 2 centuries of observing alien species. The footage showed Russian and American soldiers sharing ammunition. It showed Chinese and Japanese scientists working side by side on weapons calculations. It showed Indian and Pakistani generals coordinating attacks as if they had been allies their entire lives. "Unified," Veltheri said. "Not perfectly, not easily. But when extinction came calling, every difference that had divided them for generations simply stopped mattering. They became one species, one people, fighting with one purpose." More footage played. Ordinary citizens pulling survivors from rubble. Farmers sharing their last food with refugees. Doctors working until they collapsed, then getting up and working more. They are reckless and emotional, and they make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They are everything that sophisticated civilizations are supposed to have evolved beyond. And yet, when the moment came, they fought harder and longer and with more creativity than any species in council records. Veltheri turned back to face the arbiter. "The galaxy has many ancient and powerful civilizations. Most of them are stagnant, comfortable, content to maintain what they have rather than reach for more. Humanity is none of those things. They are young and chaotic, and they have no idea what they are capable of. Given another century, given access to the knowledge and technology that the Council has been hoarding for millennia, they will not be primitive anymore." She took a breath. "I broke the rules because the rules were wrong. I claimed protectorate status because humanity deserved protection. And if this council believes that following protocol is more important than doing what is right, then I will accept whatever punishment you choose. But I will not apologize for what I did." The chamber erupted in debate. Voices rose in anger, in support, in confusion. The arguments continued for hours, then days. In the end, Veltheri was formally censured, but not removed from her position. Earth was granted provisional protectorate status, pending a full review of humanity's potential value to the galactic community. It was not the total victory Veltheri had hoped for, but it was enough. Humanity would have time to rebuild, time to grow, time to become something that even they could not imagine yet. On Earth, the rebuilding began slowly. Governments that had been at odds learned to cooperate. Resources that had been hoarded were shared freely. The walls between nations, which had seemed so important before the invasion, now seemed almost silly. Everyone had seen what humanity could accomplish when they worked together. No one wanted to go back to the way things had been. Danny Hutchins, promoted to colonel in recognition of his service during the invasion, was appointed as humanity's first official liaison to the Galactic Council. He traveled to the great station where Velthari had fought for his species, and he walked through halls filled with beings, so strange that his mind could barely process what he was seeing. He met with Ambassador Velthari privately. In her quarters, where she had made the decision that saved his world. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "You risked everything. Your career, your reputation, maybe your life. For people you had never met, on a planet you had only watched from a distance. Why?" Velthari considered the question carefully before answering. "I have studied hundreds of species over my lifetime," she said. "Most of them are predictable. Given certain circumstances, they will behave in certain ways. It makes them easy to understand, easy to categorize, easy to dismiss." She looked at Danny with an expression that might have been admiration. "Your species is not predictable. When everything said you should surrender, you fought. When logic said you should despair, you hoped. When every calculation said you would fail, you succeeded. I saved humanity because I believe the galaxy needs that kind of unpredictability. We have become too comfortable, too certain of ourselves. You remind us that the universe is still full of surprises." Danny smiled, the first genuine smile he had managed in weeks. "Well," he said, "I guess you made the right bet. We're still here." Nest. 3 months later, Danny stood at the dedication ceremony for the United Earth Memorial in Geneva. It was a massive structure, a wall of polished black stone that stretched for nearly a kilometer. 93 million names were inscribed on its surface, every person who had died during the 5 days of invasion. It would take a lifetime to read them all. Survivors and families filled the plaza in front of the memorial. Cameras broadcast the ceremony to every corner of the planet. The whole world was watching. A reporter approached Danny after the speeches were finished. "Colonel Hutchins, what do you think about Earth's new place in the galaxy? We were isolated for so long, and now we are part of something much bigger." Danny looked up at the sky. It was a clear day, and he could see stars beginning to appear as the sun set. Somewhere up there, civilizations he had never imagined were going about their business. And now they knew that humanity existed. "I think," he said slowly, "that they finally understand what we have always known. Humans do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not stop fighting for each other, no matter how bad things get. We have been doing it for 10,000 years, and we will keep doing it for 10,000 more." He paused, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "And if the rest of the galaxy is smart, they will remember that. Because next time, we will be ready. Next time, we will not just survive. We will win." The sun set over Geneva, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Around the world, people gathered with their families, their communities, their fellow humans. They were still healing. They were still grieving. But they were together, united in a way they had never been before. Somewhere among the stars, Ambassador Velthari watched the ceremony through the monitoring station's sensors. She saw the humans standing together, mourning their dead, celebrating their survival, looking toward a future that was suddenly full of possibilities they had never imagined. She smiled, which was a rare thing for her species. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, she thought, was exactly as it should be.